I'm Sally Barron, and this is Narrated Archives. Join me as we dust off the books time forgot to rediscover the stories, essays, and articles that belong to everyone. Today we're meeting Bill Nye. No, not the scientific foodie. We're meeting the 19th century American humorist, journalist, and author known for his witty, satirical columns and depictions of Western life. Edgar Wilson Bill Nye was born in 1850 in Maine. He moved with his parents to Wisconsin in 1852, settling on a farm near River Falls. His schooling was intermittent. Later, he read law in Chippewa Falls, and shortly before leaving the state, was unsuccessful with a short-lived newspaper venture in Grantsburg. He moved to Laramie in the Wyoming Territory in 1876, where he worked as a postmaster, justice of the peace, and journalist. He gained national fame after founding the Laramie Boomerang in Wyoming, and later writing for the New York World. He contributed to the frontier humor genre alongside Mark Twain, noted for hyperbole and witty satire. He toured the U.S. with poet James Whitcomb Riley from 1886 to 1890, creating a highly popular comedic act. Due to poor health, he moved to Arden, North Carolina in 1891, where he continued to write until his death from meningitis in 1896. His most famous works include Bill Nye and Boomerang, 40 Liars and Other Lies, and Bill Nye's History of the United States. Nye was considered one of the most prominent humorists of his era. Today we're sampling a few of his thoughts and theories from Remarks, published in 1886. First up is Mush and Melody, where our troubadour delves into a grand solution for a non-problem, providing that if you squint hard enough, anything can turn into a crisis. Mush and Melody. Lately, I've been giving a good deal of attention to hygiene in other people. The gentle reader will notice that, as a rule, the man who gives the most time and thought to this subject is an invalid himself. Just as the young theological student devotes his first sermon to the care of children, and the ward politician talks the smoothest on the subject of how and when to plant rutabagas or wean a calf from the parent stem. Having been thrown into the Society of Physicians a great deal the past 2 years, mostly in the role of patient, I have given some study to the human form, its structure and idiosyncrasies, as it were. Perhaps few men in the same length of time have successfully acquired a larger or more select repertoire of choice diseases than I have. I do not say this boastfully. I simply desire to call the attention of our growing youth to the glorious possibilities that await the ambitious and enterprising in this line. Starting out as a poor boy with few advantages in the way of disease, I have resolutely carved my way up to the dizzy heights of fame as a chronic invalid and drug-soaked relic of other days. I inherited no disease whatever. My ancestors were poor and healthy. They bequeathed me no snug little nucleus of fashionable malaria, such as other boys had. I was obliged to acquire it myself. Yet I was not discouraged. The results have shown that disease is not alone the heritage of the wealthy and the great. The poorest of us may become eminent invalids if we only go at it in the right way. But I started out to say something on the subject of health, for there are still many common people who would rather be healthy and unknown than obtain distinction with some dazzling new disease. Noticing, many years ago, that imperfect mastication and dyspepsia walked hand in hand, so to speak, Mr. Gladstone adopted in his family a regular mastication scale. For instance, 32 bites for steak, 22 for fish, and so forth. Now, I take this idea and improve upon it. Two statesmen can always act better in concert if they will do so. With Mr. Gladstone's knowledge of the laws of health and my own musical genius, I have hit on a way to make eating not only a duty, but a pleasure. Eating is too frequently irksome. There is nothing about it to make it attractive. What we need is a union of mush and melody, if I may be allowed that expression. Mr. Gladstone has given us the graduated scale, so we know just what meter a bill of fare goes in as quick as we look at it. In this way, the day is not far distant when music and mastication will march down through the dim vista of years together. The baked bean chant, the vermicelli waltz, the mush and milk march, the sad and touchful pumpkin pie refrain, the gay rollicking oxtail soup gallop, and the melting ice cream serenade will yet become musical names. Taking different classes of food, I have set them to music in such a way that the meal, for instance, may open up with a soup overture, to be followed by a roast beef march in C, and so on, closing with a kind of mince pie la somnambula pianissimo in G. Space, of course, forbids an extended description of this idea as I propose to carry it out. But the conception is certainly grand. Let us picture the jaws of a whole family moving in exact time to a Strauss waltz on the silent remains of the late lamented hen, and we see at once how much real pleasure may be added to the process of mastication. Now, we soar into flying machines, showcasing a range of aerial contraptions that hover somewhere between mildly impressive and why on earth would anyone try that? Flying machines. A long and exhaustive examination of the history of flying machines enables me to give, briefly, some of the main points of a few, for the benefit of those who may be interested in this science. I give what I do in order to prepare the public to take advantage of the different methods and be ready at once to fly as soon as the weather gets pleasant. A Frenchman invented a flying machine, or douphanie, as we scientists would term it, in 1600 and something, whereby he could sail down from the woodshed and not break his neck. He could not rise from the ground like a lark and trill a few notes as he skimmed through the sky, but he could fall off an ordinary haystack like a setting hen with the aid of his wings. His name was Besnier. 125 years after that, a prisoner at Vienna named Jacob Dagen told the jailer that he could fly. The jailer seemed incredulous, and so Jake constructed a pair of double-barrel umbrellas that worked by hand and fluttered with his machine into the air 50 feet. He came down in a direct line, and in doing so, ran one of the umbrellas through his thorax. I am glad it is not the custom to wear an umbrella in the thorax. In England, during the present century, several inventors produced flying machines, but in an evil hour agreed to rise them on themselves, and so they died from their injuries. Some came down on top of the machines, while others preceded their inventions by a few feet, but the result was the same. The invention of flying machines has always been handicapped, as it were, by this fact. Men inventing a flying machine and then try to ride it and show it off, and thus they are prevented by death from perfecting their rolling stock and securing their right-of-way. In 1842, Mr. William Henderson got out a two-propeller machine and tried to incorporate a company to utilize it for the purpose of carrying letters, running errands, driving home the cows, lighting the northern lights, and skimming the cream off the Milky Way. but it didn't seem to compete very successfully with other modes of travel, and so Mr. Henderson wrapped it up in an old tent and put it away in the hay-mow. In 1853, Mr. J.H. Johnson patented a balloon and parachute dingus which worked on the principle of a duck's foot in the mud. I use scientific terms because I am unable to express myself in the common language of the vulgar herd. This machine had a tail which, under great excitement, it would throw over the dashboard as it bounded through the air. Probably the biggest thing in its way under this head was the revival of flying under the presidency of Duke of Argyll, the society being called the Aeronautical Society of Great Britain. This society made some valuable calculations and experiments in the interest of aerostation, adding much to our scientific knowledge and filling London with the immobilized injured. In 1869, Mr. Joseph T. Kaufman invented and turned loose upon the people of Glasgow an infernal machine intended to soar considerably in a quiet kind of way and to be propelled by steam. It looked like a bird known to ornithology as the fly-up-the-crick, and had an air brake, patent coupler, buffer, and platform. It was intended to hold 2 men on ice and a rosewood casket with silver handles. It was mounted on wheels, and, as it did not seem to skim through the air very much, the people of Glasgow hitched a clothesline to it and used it for a bandwagon. Rufus Porter invented an aerial doodad 10 years ago in Connecticut, where so many crimes have been committed since Mark Twain moved there. This was called the aeroport and looked like a seedwort floating through space. This engine was worked by springs connected with propellers. A saloon was suspended beneath it, I presume on the principle that when a man is intoxicated, he weighs a pound less. This machine flew around the rotunda of the Merchants' Exchange in New York City 11 times, like a hen with her head cut off, but has not been on the wing much since then. Other flying machines have been invented, but the air is not peopled with them as I write. Most of them had folded their pinions and sought the seclusion of a henhouse. It is to be hoped that very soon some such machine will be perfected, whereby a man may flit from the 5th story of the Grand Pacific Hotel in Chicago to Montreal before breakfast, leaving nothing in his room but the furniture and his kind regards. Such an invention would be hailed with much joy, and the sale would be enormous. Now, however, the matter is still in its infancy. The mechanical birds invented for the purpose of skimming through the ether blue have not scum. The machines were built with high hopes and a throbbing heart, but the aforesaid ether remains unscum as we go to press. The Milky Way is in the same condition, awaiting the arrival of the fearless skimmer. Will men ever be permitted to pierce the utmost details of the sky and ramble around among the stars with a gum overcoat on? Sometimes I trow he will, and then again, I ween not. In the Amateur Carpenter, really leaning into the amateur part, the results of these projects might just redefine what it means to measure twice and cut once. The Amateur Carpenter. In my opinion, every professional man should keep a chest of carpenter tools in his barn or shop, and busy himself at odd hours with them in constructing the varied articles that are always needed about the house. There is a great deal of pleasure in feeling your own independence of other trades, and more especially of the carpenter. Every now and then your wife will want a bracket put up in some corner or other, and with your new bright saw and glittering hammer, you can put up one upon which she can hang a cast-iron horse blanket lambrequin with inflexible water lilies sewed in it. A man will, if he tries, readily learn to do a great many such little things and his wife will brag on him to other ladies, and they will make invidious comparisons between their husbands who can't do anything of that kind whatever, and you, who are so handy. Firstly, you buy a set of amateur carpenter tools. You do not need to say that you are an amateur. The dealer will find that out when you ask him for an easy-running broadaxe or a green-gauge plumb line. He will sell you a set of amateur tools that will be made of old sheet iron with basswood handles, and the saws will double up like a piece of stovepipe. After you have nailed a board on the fence successfully, you will very naturally desire to do something much better, more difficult. You will probably try to erect a parlor table or rustic settee. I made a very handsome bracket last week, and I was naturally proud of it. In fastening it together, if I hadn't inadvertently nailed it to the barn floor, I guess I could have used it very well. But in tearing it loose from the barn, so that the two could be used separately, I ruined a bracket that was intended to serve as the base, as it were, of a lambrequin, which cost $9, aside from the time expended on it. During the month of March, I built an ice chest for this summer. It was not handsome, but it was roomy, and it would be very nice for the season of 1886, I thought. It worked pretty well through March and April, but as the weather begins to warm up, that ice chest is about the warmest place around the house. There is actually a glow of heat around that ice chest that I don't notice anywhere else. I've shown it to several personal friends. They seem to think it is not built tightly enough for an ice chest. My brother looked at it yesterday and said that his idea of an ice chest was that it ought to be tight enough at least to hold the larger chunks of ice, so that they would not escape through the pores of the icebox. He says he never built one, but that it stood to reason that a refrigerator like that ought to be constructed so that it would keep the cows out of it. You don't want to have a refrigerator that the cattle can get through the cracks of and eat up your strawberries on ice, he says. A neighbor of mine who once built a hen resort of laths and now wears a thick thumbnail that looks like a Brazil nut as a memento of that pullet corral, says my ice chest is all right enough, only that it is not suited to this climate. He thinks that along the Bering Strait during the holidays, my ice chest would work like a charm. And even here, he thought, if I could keep the fever out of my chest, there would be less pain. I have made several other little articles of vertu this spring, to the construction of which I have contributed a good deal of time and 2 fingernails. I have also sawn into my leg 2 or 3 times. The leg, of course, will get well, but the pantaloons will not. Parties wishing to meet me in my studio during the morning hour will turn into the alley between 8th and 9th Streets, enter the 3rd stable door on the left, pass around behind my Gothic horse, and give the countersign and 3 kicks on the door in an ordinary tone of voice. Up next is One Kind of Fool, with Nye's portrait of a young drifter who's about as skilled at lying as a toddler trying to play poker. One Kind of Fool. A young man with a plated watch chain that would do to tie up a sacred elephant came into Denver the other day from the east, on the Julesburg short line, and told the clerk that he had just returned from Europe, and was on his way across the continent with the intention of publishing a book of international information. He handed an oilcloth grip across the counter, registered in a bold, bad way with a flourish that scattered the ink all over the clerk's white shirt front. He was assigned to a quiet room on the 5th floor that had been damaged by water a few weeks before by the fire department. After an hour or 2 spent in riding up and down the elevator and ringing for things that didn't cost anything, he oiled his hair and strolled into the dining room with a severe air and sat down opposite a big cattleman, who never oiled his hair or stuck his nose into other people's business. The European traveler entered into conversation with the cattleman. He told him all about Paris and the continent, meanwhile polishing his hands on the tablecloth and eating everything within reach. While he ate another man's dessert, he chatted on gaily about Cologne and pitied the cattleman who had to stay out on the bleak plains and watch the cows, while others paddled around Venice and acquired information in a foreign land. At first, the cattleman showed some interest in Europe, but after a while he grew quiet and didn't seem to enjoy it. Later on, the European tourist, with soiled cuffs and auburn mane, ordered the waiters around in a majestic way to impress people with his greatness, tipped over the vinegar cruet into the salt, and ate a slice of boiled egg out of another man's salad. Casually, a tall Kansas man strolled in and asked the European tourist what he was doing in Denver. The cattleman, who, by the way, has been abroad 5 or 6 times and is as much at home in Paris as he is in Omaha, investigated the matter and learned that the fresh French tourist had been herding hens on a chicken ranch in Kansas for 6 years and had never seen blue water. He then took a few personal friends to the dining room door, and they watched the alleged traveler. He had just taken a long, refreshing drink from the finger bowl of his neighbor on the left, and was, at that moment, trying to scoop up a lump of sugar with the wrong end of the tongs. There are a good many fools who drift around through the world and dodge the authorities, but the most disastrous ass that I know is the man who goes west with $2.40 in his pocket, without brains enough to soil the most delicate cambric handkerchief, and tries to play himself for a savant, with so much knowledge that he has to shed information all the time to keep his abnormal knowledge from hurting him. And to wrap up, Bill Nye draws a curious parallel between his prose and the illustrious Noah Webster, proving that even in writing, comparisons can stretch the limits of credulity. Recollections of Noah Webster. Mr. Webster, no doubt, had the best command of language of any American author prior to our day. Those who have read his ponderous but rather disconnected romance known as Webster's Unabridged Dictionary, or How One Word Led On to Another, will agree with me that he was smart. Noah never lacked for a word by which to express himself. He was a brainy man and a good speller. It would ill become me at this late day to criticize Mr. Webster's great work, a work that is now in almost every library, schoolroom, and counting house in the land. It is a great book. I do believe that, had Mr. Webster lived, he would have been equally fair in his criticism of my books. I hate to compare my own works to those of Mr. Webster, because it may seem egotistical in me to point out the good points in my literary labors, but I have often heard it said, and so do not state it solely upon my own responsibility, that Mr. Webster's book does not retain the interest of the reader all the way through. He has tried to introduce too many characters, and so we cannot follow them all the way through. It is a good book to pick up and while away an idle hour with, perhaps, but no one could cling to it at night till the fire went out, chained to the thrilling plot and the glowing career of its hero. Therein consists the great difference between Mr. Webster and myself. A friend of mine at Sing Sing once wrote me that from the moment he got hold of my book, he never left his room till he finished it. He seemed chained to the spot, he said, and if you can't believe a convict who is entirely out of politics, who in the name of George Washington can you believe? Mr. Webster was most assuredly a brilliant writer, and I have discovered in his later editions 118,000 words, no two of which are alike. This shows great fluency and versatility, it is true, but we need something else. The reader waits in vain to be thrilled by the author's wonderful word painting. There is not a thrill in the whole tome. I had heard so much of Mr. Webster that when I read his book, I confess I was disappointed. It is cold, methodical, and dispassionate in the extreme. As I said, however, it is a good book to pick up for the purpose of whiling away an idle moment, and no one should start out on a long journey without Mr. Webster's tale in his pocket. It has broken the monotony of many a tedious trip for me. Mr. Webster's Speller was a great work of less pretensions, perhaps, and yet it had an immense sale. 8 years ago, this book had reached a sale of 40 million, and yet it had the same grave defect. It was disconnected, cold, prosy, and dull. I read it for years, and at last became a close student of Mr. Webster's style. Yet I never found but one thing in this book for which there seems to have been such a perfect stampede that was even ordinarily interesting, and that was a little gem. It was so thrilling in its details and so diametrically different from Mr. Webster's style that I have often wondered who he got to write it for him. It related to the discovery of a boy by an elderly gentleman in the crotch of an ancestral apple tree, and the feeling of bitterness and animosity that sprung up at the time between the boy and the elderly gentleman. Though I have been a close student of Mr. Webster for years, I am free to say, and I do not wish to do an injustice to a great man in doing so, that his ideas of literature and my own are entirely dissimilar. Possibly his book has had a little larger sale than mine, but that makes no difference. When I write a book, it must engage the interest of the reader and show some plot to it. It must not be jerky in its style and scattering in its statements. I know it is a great temptation to write a book that will sell, but we should have a higher object than that. I do not wish to do an injustice to a man who has done so much for the world, and one who could spell the longest word without hesitation, but I speak of these things just as I would expect people to criticize my work. If we aspire to monkey with the literati of our day, we must expect to be criticized. That's the way I look at it. P.S. I might also state that Noah Webster was a member of the legislature of Massachusetts at one time, and though I ought not to throw it up to him at this date, I think it is nothing more than right that the public should know the truth. Bill Nye had some wild ideas that remind me of tales from our Banjo Patterson episode. Imagine what he'd think of our planes zipping from Chicago to Montreal in just a couple of hours. And let's not even get started on space travel. For more short story selections from the public domain, be sure to follow Narrated Archives wherever you listen to podcasts. Your reviews and ratings are the best way to support the show and ensure we can continue to bring you these stories. We're always looking for new tales to read. If there's a particular author or short story from the public domain you'd like to hear, please submit your suggestions through our website at narratedarchives.com or email sbnarration@sallybaronvoiceovers.com. Thank you for listening.